Okay? No, I really found what I liked to eat by the time I was 6. I've saved a lot of experimenting since then by just continuing to.
Warren Buffett and I are going to perform for you. This has been described as a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and you'll understand why. Once will be enough in life.
This goes back to the patent for the razor. This is 70 years ago, roughly, on that particular razor.
And how did Gillette come about, and why did you decide to get involved in Gillette?
Well, Gillette, here's a company that after 100 years of being in the razor and blade business has 70% or so of the value of razors and blades throughout the world. Yeah. Now, when you have that kind of permanent advantage, obviously, with the consumer, it's not going to go away in a few years. And it's not going to go away in decades. I mean, this is a company that really has something.
This meets the Buffett test.
It meets the test. It meets the durable competitive advantage. Yeah. Well, when I sleep at night, I know that hair is growing on the faces of billions of men around the world, and that hair is growing on twice as many legs of women around the world. But I don't think too much about the women's legs. I wouldn't get to sleep.
Few business operations have ever been constructed to require so little continuing intelligence in corporate headquarters. An idiot who was willing just to sit here would have a very good record long after the present incumbents were dead.
What's in your wallet right now?
I'd say about probably $400 or $500.
20s or 50s or hundreds?
Well, I've got a few hundred.
I want to see. Let's see.
You want to see? Okay,
yes,
sure.
I do.
Yeah, well, most women do. You're not unusual.
Whoa! You get 2 free ones for that.
Oh, wow.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Thank you.
Much better than the way I did it, I might add.
It all began with a key strategic alliance, a merger 100 years ago between Microsoft, Walmart, and Starbucks. Micro Wallbucks. However, an elite rebel force of investment bankers created me, a biogenic being who can travel back in time and stop the strategic alliance from ever taking place. I am the Warrenator.
What is your next goal in life now that you're the richest man in the country?
That's easy. It's to be the oldest man in the country. If you buy an ounce of gold today and you hold it 100 years, you can go to it every day and you can coo to it and you can caress it and you can fondle it, and 100 years from now, you'll have 1 ounce of gold and it won't have done anything for you in between. Making money did not motivate him. He had all the money he needed, and I remember one time I was standing with him by the elevator. We were going down to eat at the cafeteria in the bottom of the Shannon building. He said, Warren, he said, don't worry too much about making money. It won't change the way you live. He said, it'll change the way your wife lives. But he said, our wives live differently. But he says, look, you and I are wearing the same clothes. We're going to eat in the same cafeteria, so relax. Bet your life it isn't her all. Could she love? Could she woo? Could she do? Has anybody seen my gal?
See my agent.
They even get to see.
People talk about the aging management at Berkshire, and I always assume they're talking about Charlie when they say that. But I would like to point out that in 3 more years, Charlie will be aging at 1% a year. And he is no one is aging less than Charlie. If you could take some of these new companies with 25-year-olds, they're aging at 4% a year. So we will have the slowest aging managed percentage-wise by far that any corporate, any American company has.
Quality for an investment manager.
It's a temperamental quality, not an intellectual quality. You don't need tons of IQ in this business. I mean, you have to have enough IQ to get from here to downtown Omaha.
Competency is a relative concept, and what a lot of us need, including the one speaking, is what I needed to get ahead was to compete against idiots, and luckily there's a large supply. And
it was Mario Cuomo that said, you know, you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. and if you think about it, the whole act of campaigning is raising people's expectations, and then once you get in, you have to bring them down.
If you mix the mathematics of the chain letter or the Ponzi scheme with some legitimate development like the development of the internet, you are mixing something which is wretched and irrational and has bad consequences with something that has very good consequences. But you know, if you mix raisins with turds, they're still turds.
That's why they have me write the annual report.
The surest way to make money is to buy your own dollar bills for 80 cents or 90 cents. Now, it's not precise what that dollar bill is. I mean, whether our stock is worth 138% or 135% a book or some number, I don't know. I just know it's worth more than 120%. But, you know, if somebody walks in here, I don't have to know whether they weigh 300 pounds or 350 pounds to know that they're fat, you know. So, I mean, you don't have to be precise on these numbers.
That she couldn't understand why people got into envy, jealousy, because it was the only one of the sins that you could never possibly have any fun at. But generally speaking, on Wall Street, I think a lot of people have had the wrong kind of grandmothers. I would rather throw a viper down my shirt front than hire a compensation consultant.
Talk for a moment about your skills.
We can do that in a moment.
You think one moment's enough?
Yeah, well, I'll stretch it out. They hadn't really faced it. It's a little like facing your own mortality to some extent, making that plan. And that's tough for people sometimes. And they do tend to postpone the decision. So I tell these people I call, you know, the last will is what counts. But I tell them, you know, if I'm talking to some 70-year-old, I say, do you really think your decision-making ability is going to be better when you're 95 with some blonde on your lap or now? So let's get on board, fellas. You know.
You want to develop a good character and good mental habits, and you want to learn from your mistakes, every single one, as you go along. And of course, you particularly want to avoid evil or seriously irrational people, particularly if they are attractive members of the opposite sex. That can
Charlie knows more about this. The expert. Charlie and I have a code word we use when we see some guy that we really think is a jerk. Yeah. We will say to him, "Boy, you think like a CPA." And the guy kind of gets all pumped up, and of course our code word is crooked, psychotic, and you could fill in the last.
Can I fill in the A? I'm still
don't.
Our situation in looking for this help reminds me of an apocryphal tale about Mozart. And a young man of 25 or so once asked to see Mozart, and he said, "I'm thinking of starting to write symphonies, and I'd like to get your advice." And Mozart said, "Well, you're too young to write symphonies." And the guy says, "But you were writing them when you were 10 years old." And Mozart says, "Yes," he says, "but I wasn't asking anybody else for advice how to do it." And so if you remind yourself of young Mozart, why, you're the man for us.
You have said that you've missed out on some of those, like you should have bought Amazon a long time ago, you should have bought Google/Alphabet a long time ago. Could this be one of those scenarios?
Oh, it always can be.
Yeah.
I mean, there were a paradise of the Desert Inn one time, many years ago. That no, they had them in a little case. They came up 32 times in a row. You know, well, that's what, 1,000 times, a million times, a billion times. You know, 4 billion to 1, a little over. So you can go around making dumb bets and win. You know. It's not something you want to take as a lifetime policy, though. I mean, I don't worry about. I worry much more about the things I do than the things I don't do. I mean, I missed all kinds of opportunities. The managers will do very well, and they'll do very well even if they fall on their face.
But you complain about the fact that they take 2% off the top, whether it does bad or good.
It's very interesting. Some of them would be running mutual funds where they get 0.5%.
and with no performance fee, and then they go over to another field and they say, well, we're so good that we deserve a performance fee, but we now need 4 times a 2% minimum fee.
Yeah.
You know, otherwise it isn't worth us coming to the office in the morning.
You even suggested 20%. You know, there's a rising tide, and some of them will get 20% just because of that, rather than taking, as I think your deal is with Lou Simpson, you take 10% of something that does better than a certain standard.
That's exactly right. And the idea, well, it'd be like going out to the racetrack, you know. I mean, and a tout giving you touting a different horse to each of 10 people. I mean, he's going to get a winner. Well, if you set up a partnership in each of 10 years going out and you get 2 and 20, there's going to be 3 or 4 years there, you know, where an orangutan would have made 25%, and then you get a big fee, and then the losses come, and the guy says, well, too bad, now we'll start another partnership.
But somebody must love them because the money is just flowing into them from pension funds and everywhere else.
Yeah, well,
to these people.
So I had a brother-in-law down in the stockyards in Omaha, and I said, what do you tell these farmers when they come in? You know, you can sell their pigs, the other guy can sell their pigs. He says, Warren, it isn't how you sell them, it's how you tell them.
There's wisdom.
Warren, if people weren't so often wrong, we wouldn't be so rich.
He's finally explained it to me. Okay.
What are we going to be surprised has barely changed 50 years from now?
Human nature. Yeah, people will be doing exactly the same foolish things they do now.
I do think they created something that was probably unwise. They got countries in there that shouldn't have been there. You can't form a business partnership with your thriftless, drunken brother-in-law, you know. I mean, you have to make your partnerships with somebody else. And I think they lowered their standards a little, and it's caused strains.
I think everything here is off the record, understand.
Tom, incidentally, has a very low-key style, and Bobby Bowden a few years ago was in Lincoln, and he said that on their first date that Nancy had to slap Tom 3 times, and somebody said, was he that fresh? And she said, no, I was just checking to be sure he was alive. Tom had a fairly conservative offense for a time in the past, although it hasn't been so conservative the last few years. But somebody said at that time the most reckless thing he did was to eat some cottage cheese a day after the expiration on the carton. But then,
Yeah, Warren, why don't you join me and buy some cows? I like your farmland, but you're in Nebraska for Iowa. You love steak. I mean, we can have leather. We can have manure. We can have milk. We can have meat. We'll employ people.
You can have the manure. I'll take the meat.
I've got plenty of the manure. No, but we'll employ people taking care of the cows. I mean, that little bar of gold that's worth 50, whatever. We had one in here. Look, I think it was worth like $60,000 or $70,000. I can get like so many head of cattle for that and be productive. That was my point. But you like farmland. You just too lazy to take care of the cattle or something? Pay some people.
Absolutely. Have you ever tried to take care of cattle, Joe?
It must be. I think it might be hard. I know I've tipped a few, but I've never.
Have you tipped? No, I hope you have not tipped. That's mean.
It's cruel.
It is cruel.
They're sweet. They're sweet, but they're not too bright. Like me.
With land, you can get somebody else to do all the work, give them a percentage of the crop, and you can sit back there for 100 years and get a percentage of the crop, and you still got the land when you get all through.
So finding your own path seems very something you really recommend to everyone. The place where you can shine.
I'm arguing to everyone. What helps everyone is to get in something that's going up, and it just carries you along without much talent or work.
Currency that's out there that people say, oh, it might be the next big thing. What do you think?
I think it's rat poison.
Put him down as undecided.
I probably shouldn't tell you this when Charlie was having a little trouble there on those last 2 words. I get a little worried about Charlie. Don't know whether I should talk about this, but I thought maybe he was losing his hearing, and I didn't want to confront him with it. I mean, we've been pals for a long time, so I went to the doctor and I said, Doc, I've got this wonderful partner, but I think maybe his hearing is going on him, and I don't want to talk to him about it. I mean, how do you say that to somebody you've known that long? And what should I do? He says, well, you stand across the room, talk to him in a normal course of tone of voice, and let me know what happens. So the next time I was with Charlie, I stood across the room and I said, Charlie, I think we ought to buy General Motors at 35. Do you agree? Not a flicker. I go halfway across the room. I said, Charlie, I think we ought to buy General Motors at 35. Do you agree? Nothing. Get right next to him, in his ear. Charlie, I think we ought to buy General Motors at 35. Do you agree? He said, for the third time, yes.
I think it would be unreasonable to expect that a successor would be as good at making new investments as Warren has been in the past. Well, that's just too damn bad.
He is operating with revenues based on market factors and costs that are not based on market factors, and that's a recipe for a lot of trouble. So I now have this 800 number, and if I ever get the urge to buy an airline stock, I dial this number and I say, my name is Warren, I'm an airaholic, and then this guy talks me down on the other end.
I think this kind of crazy speculation in enterprises not even found or picked out yet is a sign of an irritating bubble. It's just that the investment banking profession will sell shit as long as shit can be sold.
2 years ago, Fox Business asked you about Bitcoin when it was very, very much in its incipient stages, and you called it rat poison.
Yes.
Do you still feel that way?
I was holding back a little.
I live in a upper middle class neighborhood. It's a little higher middle class because I live in it in terms of the average income.
If a gun were held to your head and you had to invest in either BlackBerry right now or Bitcoin, which one?
Well, they asked a similar question of Samuel Johnson once, and he says, it's hard to determine an order of precedency between a louse and a flea.
I think it's crazy to take a job or work with people that cause your stomach to churn and keep you up at night and all of that. And if you're in a job like that, think about changing it. I've said that working with people you don't like in business is really like marrying for money, which is probably a bad idea under any circumstances, but it's crazy if you're already rich, right?
So I was born in 1930. I was conceived in 1929 because my dad was a stock salesman, and after the crash, he didn't have anything to do. Nobody. So I look back with great fondness on the 1929 crash. But
when people say, oh, the U.S. dollar's going away eventually, what do you say about that, Charlie?
Well, eventually everything goes away. The earth blows up, the solar system disappears. So eventually, on any time scale that's of interest to me, I want more U.S. dollars, not less.
5 years ago, we asked Charlie Munger, we were sitting right there, what he thought of Bitcoin, and he said rat poison. Yeah. Back then it was about $100+ per Bitcoin. Today it's 9,000. Is it still rat poison?
Well, probably rat poison squared.
One thing we've learned is if it's clear that something is a mistake, is to fix it quickly. It doesn't get better while you wait.
Well, you called rat poison 5 years ago, right here in these chairs on Fox Business. You called it rat poison, but that was when it was about $150. Today it's 9,000. It had hit 19,000.
So it's more expensive rat poison.
I've read that you're not going to burden your children with the fortune that you've amassed.
That's not the word they use, but you've got the idea.
And we got thousands and thousands of emails. Some of them were absolutely brilliant. Others, we had one from the mascot, Bailey, of the Los Angeles Kings, and his question was, hey, Warren, can you give me $20? So,
I've heard that question before.
Yeah. I'm surprised they aim so low. All right, let's start.
That's high for me, actually.
Well, exactly, $5.
Making a pledge to give at least 50%, although a lot of them name a larger number, but give at least 50% during their lifetime or at death to philanthropy. And then I encourage them to explain how they got to that decision, why they're doing it. And we get some magnificent letters, and I tell the people I talk to that the letters are enormously important, because somebody 10, 20, 50 years from now is going to read that, like maybe Bill or Melinda or I've read about Carnegie or Rockefeller or Roosevelt or you name it. You never know what's going to strike a chord. It's like a lawyer making an argument. I mean, you try to name 20 reasons why your client isn't guilty, you know. Even though you may only think one or two of them are maybe that good.
You want to make sure you got the one covered that might respond to.
And you know, all I got to do is hit a chord on one of them.
Bitcoin reminds me of what Oscar Wilde said about fox hunting. He said it was the pursuit of the uneatable by the unspeakable.
Being put on the comp committee of American corporations, as I've said, they're looking for chihuahuas and not Great Danes or Dobermans. Yeah. And I hope I'm not insulting any of my friends that are on comp committees.
You're insulting the dogs.
No.
I think there is global warming, man-caused. I'm like Freeman Dyson, the physicist. I think a lot of people pretend to know more about what's going to happen in the future. More people pretend to know than really know.
But you believe,
and they're very cocksure.
But you believe climate change is a reality, and therefore...
I think global warming is a reality, and that climate effects are quite possible. But I think a lot of the people who are howling hardly know their left hand from their right.
Bill, what do you think about it? And do we need to start? Well, I think Berkshire's already done.
Whatever you do, don't howl.
I would love to buy a share of Berkshire Hathaway. Unfortunately, my cash flow is a little tight now. Why doesn't Berkshire?
We got a loan company too.
I will guarantee you that farmland over 100 years is going to be gold, and so are equities.
Why do you think gold bugs get so irate? Because they really come out.
Yeah, it's very interesting. If you go on CNBC and say that bonds are kind of a poor investment, you know, people don't get mad at you. You don't even hear from the Treasury. I mean, you can knock almost any investment, and people may get a little irritated. But when you talk about gold, and of course that says something about their motivations for ownership. They want people to agree with them. They want They want everybody to get so scared they run to a cave with gold. And caves might be a better investment than gold. I mean, at least they're not producing more caves all the time.
But still, he believes that the 1% is being hammered unfairly. Do you agree?
Well, I don't see anybody in the 1% that wants to leave that category and join the 99% because they're feeling persecuted. No.
Question that was submitted by Twitter. Do you support redistribution of wealth? Charlie?
Not much.
Warren?
More than Charlie.
I gave a talk to some student at Harvard asked me to talk last year. He said, you know, who should I go to work for? I said, well, go to work for whomever you admire the most. And got a call from the dean about 2 weeks later. He said, what'd you tell these kids? He said, they're all becoming self-employed.
Charlie, what is the greatest measure of success, in your opinion?
Well, I think people try to succeed in different ways. Everybody would like to have a nice family life, or almost everybody. And a lot of people share our passion for getting to be a little wiser every day all your life. There's just enormous pleasure in wising up steadily. And as I said at the meeting, we're so lucky to be so ignorant that we have all these wonderful opportunities for improving ourselves. And they continue on into old age. We have massive stupidity yet to go.
What are we going to be surprised has barely changed 50 years from now?
Human nature. Yeah, people will be doing exactly the same foolish things they do now. Berkshire Hathaway looked like a cheap stock It was a terrible business.
What was your ambition then? Now you have a vehicle.
Yeah. Well, I started out by thinking I was a textile expert, but, I was disabused of that notion fairly fast. I really did. I thought, what do these guys know about making textiles? They've only been doing it a few hundred years. I mean, the Egyptians, I think, figured out how to weave. Just turned me loose in the plant and see what happened. So anyway, what happened was right at that period, the textile business was good for a very short period of time. And so I was like a duck floating on a pond when it was raining. I was going up in the world, and I thought it was because I was flapping my wings, but it was that damn rain that was coming down. And then when it quit raining, I mean, I found out, what do I know? Right. Yeah. And then we went into other businesses. I can actually make a promise to society that 99.7% of what I have when I die will either go to philanthropy or to the federal government. I would prefer that it would go to philanthropy. I think it actually will accomplish more utility if it goes to be used by some smart people in philanthropy than if it simply reduces the federal debt by $100 billion or something when I die. I don't think it makes a damn bit of difference. Whether the federal debt is $100 billion higher or lower, it won't change anything in the world. And at present days, it doesn't really save them anything because they can borrow $100 billion. It doesn't cost them anything anyway. But that condition won't prevail. But I would not regard it. I'm just talking personally. I'm not advocating this public policy, but I wouldn't, if they took it all, it would not bother me. I mean,
I guarantee it won't bother you.
Yeah, that's what Charlie was saying. Charlie says you won't know.
Congratulations. I understand that you had your birthday just a few
days
ago.
I was 80 the other day, but I may split my age too for one. We've never split the stock, but I'll split my age.
You can imagine two things. A young man marries into your family. He's a English professor at, say, Swarthmore, or he works for Chevron. Which would you pick? Because I don't see. I want to admit I'd take the guy from Chevron.
Well, I hope your daughters agree with you.
If you asked, how could Caltech teach people how to win chess tournaments or poker tournaments, you would find that some people at Caltech are very good at that and others aren't. If you want to win at those things, you better bet on the people that are really very good at it. And not everybody is. I don't think Caltech can make great investors out of most people. I think great investors to some extent are like great chess players. They're almost born to be investors.
And that's because of the tolerance for risk? Is it the patience? What are the traits of a great investor?
Obviously, you have to know a lot. But partly it's temperament. Partly it's deferred gratification. You got to be willing to wait. Good investing requires a weird combination of patience and aggression. And not many people have it. It requires a big amount of self-awareness and how much you know and how much you don't know. You have to know the edge of your own competency. And a lot of brilliant people are no good at knowing the edge of their own competency. They think they're way smarter than they are. And of course, that's dangerous and causes trouble. So I think Caltech would have a hard time teaching everybody to be a great investor.
But could it help people discover that they have that temperament? Or is this something that you mostly should try on your own?
I think you find out whether you got the qualities to win at poker by playing poker.
That's a very empirical approach, Charlie.
Yes, but I think it's right.
Have you ever bought anything on Amazon?
My assistant has bought for me. She's bought quite a few books for me.
Books?
Yeah.
What was the last book you had her buy on Amazon?
I'm not sure I remember, but actually, they were older books that I've already got in my library, but it's too much trouble to try and find them in my library, so I just buy another copy.
How many?
We had this one guy, and he was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful guy. He'd done all kinds of things for me and Charlie. And he developed Alzheimer's. We saw him very infrequently, and I think he sort of got himself up for the event, if he would see it. So he really ran this company with Alzheimer's for a couple of years, and finally it became obvious. But I really thought that was a pretty good test, that you should buy companies that are good enough so that a guy with Alzheimer's can run them. I hope they fly it with a CEO someday, you know. I'm talking up this new yardstick. About learning from your mistakes, the best thing to do is learn from other guys' mistakes. I mean, you know, it's like, you know, Patton used to say, you know, it's an honor to die for your country. Make sure the other guy gets the honor, you know. And so our approach is really to try and learn vicariously. We have no predetermined course of action whatsoever at Berkshire. We have no strategic planning department. We don't have any strategic plan. We react to what we think are opportunities.
I also want to say proudly that we have no mission statement.
I don't think I use much physics in solving my investment problems, but it occasionally helps me. Occasionally some damn fool will suggest something that violates the laws of physics, and I always turn off my mind the minute I realize the poor bastard doesn't know any physics.
When you get to be my age, you will be successful if the people that you would hope to have love you do love you. I mean, if Charlie and I know a few people that have got a lot of money and they get testimonial dinners and they get their names on buildings, and the truth is nobody loves them. And, you know, not their family, not the people who named the buildings after them. You know, it's sad, and unfortunately it's something you can't buy. I mean, Charlie and I have talked a lot of times if we could just buy $1 million worth of love. You know, I mean, it would be so much more satisfactory than to try and be lovable. But it doesn't work that way.
If you want to be a good evaluator of businesses, an investor, you really ought to figure out a way, without too much personal damage, to run a lousy business for a while. I think you learn a whole lot more about business by actually struggling with a terrible business for a couple of years than you learn by getting into a very good one where the business itself is so good that you can't mess it up.
Charlie, you said growing up during the meeting, a little kid asked you, and you said, people didn't like me much when I was growing up, so I realized I had to get rich and be generous for them to like me. Do you really care if people like you?
Well, my taste for hatred is not unending. I need some people to like me. I don't need everybody to like me.
Yeah.
We have a big advantage in that, as contrasted to virtually almost every other company, we now and in the future are eager to buy parts of wonderful businesses or all of them. I mean, most managements most investors are limited to buying parts of businesses, and most managers psychologically are geared to owning all of something that they can run themselves. It's like, I think Woody Allen said some years ago, it's the advantage of being bisexual is that it doubles your chances of a date on Saturday night. And we can go either direction in that respect.
We've used it. I've copied it in the report. I copy from all the good writers. And Ben said, just imagine that when you buy a stock that in effect, you've bought into a business where you have this obliging partner who comes around every day and offers you a price at which you'll either buy or sell, and the price is identical. And no one ever gets that in a private business where daily you get a buy-sell offer by a party. But in the stock market, you get it. That's a huge advantage. And it's a bigger advantage if this partner of yours is a heavy-drinking manic depressive. I just decided I'd put all my money in Berkshire and ride with it.
And ride with Berkshire as a vehicle,
as a kind of an extension, a corporate extension of me.
Yeah. And are you out of the textile business by then?
We got out of it. No, we did not get out of the textile business for 20 years. I even bought another textile company. I mean, this is, I'm going to confess. This is like a revival meeting now. I'm going to just go up to you and
we need that.
Forgive me, will you? Because I bought another textile company. I bought something called Wambeck Mills in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Why did you do that?
Only my psychiatrist knows. I thought I was going to solve something by doing it. I mean,
solve something?
Well, I mean, I thought that these two put together would do better. Some crazy thing. I mean, I did it myself too. No management consultant told me to do it. So it was about 85. I mean, 20 years later, before we got out of
the textile business.
I said it's a little bit like watching a parade with all these other textile companies, and you stand up on your tiptoes, and then everybody else stands up on their tiptoes to it, and all that you don't see any better, and your legs hurt. And that's what happened with textiles. I've said that to some extent, a good public school system is a lot like virginity. It can be preserved but not restored. We are looking for people that have a passion that extends beyond their paycheck every week or every month for their business. Beyond this passion, we're looking for intelligence, we're looking for energy, and we're looking for integrity. If they don't have the last, the first two will kill you, because if you hire somebody without integrity, you really want them to be dumb and lazy, don't you? I mean, you just got to fill up your mind with various competing thoughts and sort them out as to what really makes sense over time. And then once you've done a lot of that, I think you have to jump in the water, because investing on paper and investing with real money, is like the difference between reading a romance novel and doing something else. So I would, it's been, a death trap for investors ever since Orville took off. I mean, as I've said, if there had been a capitalist at Kitty Hawk, he should have shot down Orville and done us all a favor.
I have avoided all my life compensation consultants. To me, it's I hardly can find the words to express my contempt.
I will say this: if the board hires a compensation consultant after I go, I will come back.
It was one of the most remarkable things that ever happened in the history of the world, when a bunch of committed communists just looked at the prosperity of places like Singapore and said, the hell with this, we're not going to stay here in poverty, we're going to copy what works. And they changed communism. They just accepted Adam Smith and added it to their communism. And said, now we have communism with Chinese characteristics, which is China with a free market with a bunch of billionaires and so forth. And they made that shift. They deserve a lot of credit. Warren and I are not quite as good at that as changing our minds in many cases.
Yeah. He runs on sugar. We're back with Warren Buffett. That's all you're eating. The entire shareholder day is sugar, sugar, sugar.
It seems to work.
So you don't want the U.S. government telling you how much sugar you should and shouldn't eat?
No. I read a study that the best mortality was among 6-year-olds, and very few 6-year-olds died, and so I decided to study their eating habits, and look what it's done.
Okay. So Warren says he gauges his health by watching yours. How are you doing? How are you feeling?
Well, I'm doing pretty well. Charred fat globules and sugar work beautifully. You keep at it long enough.
So you're just like him. He calls you his canary in a coal mine, though.
Absolutely.
The canaries are eating sugar today.
And of course, these days I try and comport myself so that everybody thinks there are at least 7 more good years left in Warren.
Oh, wow. So he's...
You could have these crazy internet valuations in the late 1990s, but they proved themselves out in the market. I mean, the next day they were selling for more than they were the day before, and people said, you're crazy if you don't get in on this. So it's very human. Now, with housing, it's something even more dramatic than that, because most people aspire to own their own home.
And should wise people have known better?
Well, people always should know better. People don't get smarter about things that get as basic as greed and you can't stand to see your neighbor getting rich. You're smarter than he is, and he's doing these things, and he's getting rich, and your spouse is getting unhappy with you because you aren't doing it. Pretty soon you start doing it, and so you get what I call the natural progression, the 3 I's: the innovators, the imitators, and the idiots. And that's what happens in financial
We've been through all
market.
3, have we?
Everybody just kind of goes along, and you look kind of silly if you disagree.
2, 3. Bill Gates wins. Bill Gates wins.
Okay. I'm not in the circle, so nobody's going to pay us.
Oh, here it is. There it is. There's $1 on that one. Sorry, I don't have any more.
Really, Warren? You couldn't give him fair and square a 5 spot or something that you had in your wallet?
The bet was $1, and it was his fault to determine that I didn't have $1.
Well, I'm a big fan of knowing the big ideas in pretty much all the disciplines, the ones that are pretty easy to assimilate, and then using those routinely in your judgment. What I find is, though, that academia is not very good at the interdisciplinary stuff. Academia rewards a researcher who knows more and more about less and less.
You've repeatedly said that you see many wonderful stock ideas, but can't invest because they're too small. Given that many in the audience today have a lower dollar investment threshold,
do these stocks have names?
Well said.
Moody's, you're not buying. You've been selling that. At least that's what
we sold some last week. Yeah.
You sold some last week on Monday through Wednesday. There was a filing on that. The obvious question becomes: are you going to keep selling that? You're going to drop down?
I guess the obvious answer is I don't tell. We have a lot of people that would like to join us, but prices are such, competition for buying businesses is such, that the chances of pulling any one of them off is slim. But if you keep, trying to kiss enough girls, eventually one says yes. One of the interesting things about investment is that there's no degree of difficulty factor. I mean, if you're going to go diving in the Olympics and try and win a gold medal, you get paid more in effect for certain kinds of dives than others because they're more difficult and they properly adjust for that factor. But in terms of investing, there is no degree of difficulty. If something is staring you right in the face, and the easiest decision in the world, the payoff can be huge. And we get paid not for jumping over 7-foot bars, but for stepping over 1-foot bars. The Great Crash is a wonderful book, and John Galbraith describes it. But I would like to get into a bit of a personal note, which will have some relevance, not too much, but some relevance to the story of the Great Depression, because in 1929, my dad, who was 26 years of age then, was employed as a securities salesman by a local small bank. He sold stocks and bonds, but he sold stocks. And when stocks fall 48%, and you were selling them to people a few months ago, you really don't feel like going out and facing those same people. So I think my dad probably elected to do, as they say now, shelter in place, which means stay at home. There really wasn't that much in our house. We just had a small yard. It was wintertime anyway. My dad wouldn't have been puttering on the yard anyway, and there really wasn't, the television wasn't there, and he and my mother got along very well. So under those conditions, if you'll turn to the next slide, I was born about 9 months later. But at that time, I was actually born on August 30th, but the stock market was closed that day, and so I'm using the previous day's figures. But I didn't notice at the time that the market was closed. But